Mate, I'm about as shocked as the majority of the community that know what the NDIS is all about. To sit there and draw a direct line between funding for people with disabilities and the cuts to other vulnerable members of our community, to those on welfare, to those on pensions. You could draw that line across 1,000 different parts of the budget, and for some reason yesterday, something that is an issue of pride within my participation in the community, the NDIS, for some reason somebody decided that that was genius, and I'm as confused as anybody how they come to that position.
Yeah. So what do you make about politicians using this as a political tactic?
The NDIS, it's not welfare. It's not a burden. This is not my recommendation. It's not people with disabilities' recommendations. It's not the Labor Party's recommendation. This is a recommendation by the Productivity Commission to make our community, our country stronger, to add to the bottom line. This is a positive net to our economy when it's funded. And it was never meant to be a political football. And I think that this is no more welfare than your roads, than rail. This is about making sure that people with disabilities and their families can contribute to the community. And instead of going out and linking it to this burden that's carried by the government, this is the best thing that our government has done, and has been able to stay out of that political fight as much as possible. But I just wish we would get to a place 4 years after it began its rollout where the Treasurer, where the government can speak about how to further get the benefits of this for productivity for our community, and fight for it with as much vigour as it's fighting for its $50 billion business tax cut, because they believe both are benefits for our community. And to ignore the benefit, it's mischief, it's political just opportunism, and it's just wrong. And mate, I'm confused and just disheartened that they would continue this argument.
The government's argument, though, is that it has stated since that media conference yesterday that it is committed to the NDIS, though, and its argument that is that it has to, the money has to come from somewhere.
Well, you could draw a line. You could draw a line right there. They drew a line yesterday to say that it was linked to the cuts in the welfare. They linked to the cuts in the pension. How about we draw a line in who's not funding the NDIS? People who with an untouched negative gearing program there. That's not touching the NDIS. People and businesses who are benefiting from the $50 billion tax cut. That won't benefit the NDIS. When the NDIS is funded, it will pay for itself. And they know that. That was the recommendation. It needs to be funded fully, and then it will pay for itself. And instead of sitting there talking about bolting on additions to the NDIS, and instead of 4 years after it being rolled out, we could speak here today about how do we get those families who are now enabled to live life. Instead of talking about how people with disabilities across our community who are finally funded to not feel as if their disability is a sickness, so that they don't have to spend all of their years running between hospitals, that we'll invest early and we'll make them a contributor to our community. Instead of talking about how do we make sure that they get employment, how do we encourage the private part of our community, the business community, to employ people with disabilities, because that's the key and that will make it a success. We're still sitting here pretending about this is a welfare burden that they have to carry. Like that, the whole premise of how it was referred to yesterday was mischievous, and it's just I can't accept that.
Yeah, it sounds like you think it was more than mischievous, like disheartening and disillusioning.
Look, mate, there are very few times in our community over the last few years where you can sit with pride and say that our leaders, to say that our government has truly made a massive investment to make people's lives better. There are very few times that we get to sit and say that. The whole aspect of Canberra should be a thing of pride. There was no pride in yesterday. And I have sat there and I have seen the benefits that this is doing. This is changing worlds within our community. And I wish that the general public, every single one of them, would see what this NDIS is giving to our community. And it's disheartening. And when it's thrown into the political sphere, which it was never meant to be, when it is thrown into that fight, you have two teams down there at the moment. It's like watching a football match. You're watching Collingwood versus the Bombers, and there are a group of people that will just naturally defend each of those teams. And the NDIS was thrown in that yesterday. And not only thrown in it, it was thrown into one of the murkiest, dirtiest part of that game. And, mate, it's disheartening, it's concerning, and the language is important. How we speak about this, how community speaks about this, how our leaders speak about this. That's important for my community of people with disabilities so that we no longer feel as if we are a burden carried around by community. It's important for the community to look at people with disabilities and know that we are contributors. And to ignore that terminology or ignore the language and say that it's not important and say that we need to directly grab money from X to pay from the NDIS, you fund this thing and it will make us money. Short-term politics hurts the NDIS, it will hurt the government, and it hurts the community as a whole. It hurts the country.
Yeah,
I just hope that we can continue.
Sorry,
Joe. I just hope that we can all take a deep breath and look at this thing and realise that it is a thing of pride and something that we should be holding up and not pitting against another part of our budget or another part of our community.
Yeah, and that's what I was keen to hear from you now. You say you're keen on the community hearing how this is transforming people's lives. Tell us some of those individual stories that you know of how the NDIS is already changing things for people.
I've had kids. I've had kids in wheelchairs coming through my house since I think my wife didn't realise she was starting a halfway house for people with disabilities who want to be involved in sport when we got married. But they come in, and we would have funded them traditionally. We would have funded them one catheter a day to go to the toilet, and we will fund them when they end up in the hospital system. We will fund them when they see their disability as sickness, when they end up in there with kidney problems, bladder problems. We will have to fund them for the next 50 years, or we could invest early, or we could do what the NDIS is doing, and we could make sure that they have enough funding to never be sick, to never feel like their disability is an illness, so that they can go off and not just think about the next 12 months of how do I stay out of hospital, how do I get employed, how do I get a family, how do I feel like I am a valued member of community. And that is replicated across the country at the moment. We've got people who are only showered once a day once a week 4 years ago, who are now able to feel just the general, I don't know, appreciation of life of being clean so that they don't feel ashamed to leave their house.
Yeah.
They're the day-to-day stories of what the NDIS is doing, and it shouldn't be murked up by the short-term game of politicians.
Yeah. And we've heard from the experience in the ACT that there is a lot more demand for the NDIS than the original planners thought. What have you heard about that, and how much more money will be needed for the NDIS over the coming years as it is rolled out extensively and people do start taking advantage of what it has to offer?
Well, I am speaking on behalf of myself, not from any organisations that I'm associated with here or now or previously. Look, I'm not saying that the NDIS should be completely free from criticism, and I'm not saying that it is going to be the silver bullet that destroys all the obstacles in the road of people with disabilities. We are adjusting to a 30-year a policy or lack of policy, or lack of support, and it is going to take a lot to make sure that it does what needs to happen. And it won't cure all the ails of the disability community, but and there are going to be many complications that people with disabilities will need to bang heads with against the NDIS. So I have no illusions about that. But my argument isn't isn't that this is this thing that's free from criticism,
Yeah.
but it should be free from being thrown into a political argument. It should be free from being thrown into opportunism. It should be bipartisan. It should be a group of our community to work together to actually do something, which is the hope of what government would do.